Tonight on CBC Vancouver News. A new cash injection to help flood victims in the Fraser Valley a year and a half later.
My neighbor, for example, hasn't even started rebuilding his house.
The criticism and why some say it's still not enough. Plus, a huge blow to BC salmon farms.
Is bowing to environmental campaigners in this polarized situation here.
And the high-stakes debate around the science behind them. And Canada's top grocers are posting above-average profits.
Companies, they have no heart. They always want to make the same amount or more.
The questions that's raising while grocery prices soar.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Anita Bathe. We begin tonight with a big lump of money being given by the feds to deal with the ongoing flood recovery in BC a year and a half later. Many are still rebuilding with no end in sight. And as Eva Ugwensenj reports, some say the funding is not enough.
A promise to rebuild flood-damaged parts of the Fraser Valley, made not far from this rubble. A crucial bridge that once connected Abbotsford to Yarrow, washed out when the waters broke through the dikes of the Sumas Prairie.
For the locals, that was a major road that connected Abbotsford and Yarrow.
Ottawa is putting forward another $500 million to help BC's flood recovery, bringing the total to more than $1 billion in support.
I also want to be very clear that the money we are announcing today and that we announced back in July is simply interim payments because we know there's much work to be done.
The provincial government will decide how to spend the money with First Nations, regional and municipal governments and businesses.
There's a lot of homes. I walk around the neighborhood. There's still 3 or 4 homes just on my street that haven't been rebuilt.
The province says disaster relief funding has been paid out to over 99% of individual farms and businesses that applied for it. But some here have only received the disaster relief funding they need to rebuild in the last few months. Others worry the region isn't ready to withstand another event like the 2021 atmospheric river.
They talk about putting in new pumps to pull the water up and over the floodgates, which I think could have saved us had they been there. Right, if they could just spend that, I think they're talking a couple $100 million for that, right?
The management of the Nooksack River south of the border is another concern. Meanwhile, in BC's interior, farmers face their own set of challenges.
The river is running where our land used to be. We have huge hay fields that the river ran over and gouged out in some spots, and it's down to rock. It's our neighbors. Their hay fields are all river bottom.
The federal government estimated last year it could ultimately cost more than $5 billion to rebuild BC after the 2021 natural disasters. From the massive heat wave and deadly wildfires in June and July to the flooding in November. Earlier this month, BC announced more than $20 million in funding to help First Nations and local governments reduce risks of future climate disasters. Eva Ugwensenj, CBC News, Vancouver.
BC's seniors advocate says the province needs a fundamental change in how it helps older people stay in their own homes. She's making an economic argument tonight. Isabel Mackenzie's office reviewed BC's home support program, which helps seniors with things like bathing, using the washroom, medication, support, and nutrition. She says while funding has risen more than 40% in the last 5 years, the number of hours delivered is far less, and family caregivers are feeling more strain. BC also charges for home support, unlike many other provinces. Mackenzie says that is a big problem.
When we look at the cost to the system, we are saying that we are not prepared to pay $14,000 a year to give this woman 1 hour of home support a day, but we are prepared to pay $60,000 a year to place her in long-term care.
Mackenzie recommends making home care more affordable and boosting respite care to help family caregivers, among other things. Well, amid inflation and the rising cost of living, Canada's largest food retailers' profits are up again. The Loblaw company says it earned nearly 12% more last quarter compared to the same time a year ago. That adjusted profit, more than $500 million, and it's up by about $60 million. Now, earnings at other major grocers are up as well, and that's raising eyebrows for customers who see prices remaining high, even as inflation has started to cool. Nisha Patel looks at what may be driving it all.
Food prices are soaring, and Loblaw says customers are shopping more often at discount grocers. That helped boost its earnings. But at No Frills, there is still plenty of frustration.
Companies, they have no heart. They always want to make the same amount or more.
I do believe it costs them more, but not as much as they're extorting from people.
Loblaw, along with competitors Empire and Metro, have come under scrutiny lately. All three companies insist they're not taking advantage of inflation to pad profits. Loblaw CEO Galen Weston says higher costs are just being passed on from suppliers, and the sticker shock could continue in the coming months.
We still have over 1,000 supplier requests on our desks for significant cost increases.
Big food manufacturers say they're facing higher costs for labor, raw materials, and transportation. So General Mills and Nestle plan to hike prices again this year. But many consumers have directed their frustration at grocers, calling it greedflation.
Whether or not greedflation is at play is really, really difficult to nail down.
Still, some experts say 80% of grocery sales are controlled by 5 retail chains, and it's cause for concern.
There is also a question mark about the role of market concentration and a lack of competition in driving up these food prices.
The debate over whether retailers have raised prices too much is ongoing, from produce aisles to Parliament Hill.
This, unfortunately, is a symptom of an overheated economy.
And from the Bank of Canada governor, a warning.
The companies do need to normalize their pricing behavior. That's part of getting back to 2% inflation.
Businesses need to get price increases under control soon, or the central bank says it could take action with more interest rate hikes to slow the stubborn inflation that Canadians have endured for too long.
That's Nisha Patel reporting tonight. Well, over the past year, Vancouver's Downtown Eastside has turned into a tent city. Members of the homeless population have set up structures that now fill the sidewalks, and this has led to an ongoing conflict with the city as it tries to keep those sidewalks clear. But as Joel Ballard reports, residents say they have nowhere else to go.
Stop the sweep! Stop the sweep! Stop the sweep! Stop the sweep!
A clear message. Residents living in tents and structures on the sidewalks of the Downtown Eastside say they're not going anywhere without adequate housing alternatives. This comes after Vancouver city staff enforced a bylaw yesterday, which prohibits the accumulation of structures and personal belongings on sidewalks.
We'll leave to go to the store or something like that, and they'll march in and grab all my... throw it away.
Residents call them street sweeps, adding that often their possessions are never returned. But the city says it isn't leaving people out in the cold, saying in a statement that when individuals are required to remove their structures and have indicated that they do not have other housing, they are being offered access to shelter spaces or available SRO rooms. But that hasn't been the experience of many of the people here.
They want us to leave the street, quit camping on the streets and stuff like that, but they don't really give us anywhere to go.
And the housing that is available, they say, is part of the problem.
The SROs are unlivable. They are disgusting. They have bugs, mice, rats, bed bugs. This is why people would rather live out on the street.
There have also been safety concerns, reports of broken elevators and limited access to hot water, among other things, they say.
When you evict people from the only shelter they have, however inadequate, however unsafe, but when you evict them to nowhere or to situations that are less safe, and that includes shelters or housing where people could be harmed, you are violating their charter right.
Yesterday, city staff were accompanied by VPD officers. The department says its officers are on standby to keep the peace at the request of the city.
It can be quite volatile and tense as the city crews move about the neighborhood and interact with people. There have been incidents in the past that have resulted in violence.
The city says staff are in the area daily, cleaning and attempting to enforce the bylaw. But what will it actually take to remove tents and structures from the sidewalks? These residents say the answer is simple.
We need dignified housing for everybody.
Joel Ballard, CBC News, Vancouver.
The Vancouver Police Department says it's sending more patrol officers to the Downtown Eastside after a week of gun violence. A man suffered multiple gunshot wounds on East Hastings Street after a shooting Sunday afternoon. And this morning, police say a man was shot while riding his bike in the area. The VPD says they've recovered 14 real and replica firearms from the area in 4 days.
We're hoping that by temporarily redeploying additional officers that will have a positive impact by tamping down on some of the violence, the guns, and disorder in the area.
The extra officers will patrol Chinatown and Gastown. Well, it's been recommended for years, but don't expect BC to get a provincial police force anytime soon. That message is coming from Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth today, and that is despite the fact municipal decisions around policing are becoming more expensive and in some cases more controversial. Justin McElroy joins us live tonight with more. Justin, what are we seeing?
Yeah, Anita, we asked the Public Safety Minister about this today for two reasons. The first is, as you said, municipal governments are currently putting together their budgets for this year on policing. And as we're seeing, particularly in Surrey right now, it's a huge topic of conversation over how much it's costing, the jurisdiction squabbles, and whether the province will step in. But the second reason is it was just in April of last year that an all-party legislative committee put forward a new recommendation asking for this province-wide police force, saying that it would work better than the patchwork of jurisdictions that currently exist, where some cities have their own forces, some cities have their own detachments, and it can become quite an issue in overseeing all of them. But when we talked to the Public Safety Minister, Mike Farnworth, today as to whether anything is going to happen about that recommendation or anything has happened so far since it was issued, well, take a look at what he said.
There are many other issues that we are dealing with out of that report. There's new legislation going to be in place by the fall, but the provincial police force was one of their recommendations, but I think that was one that was covered by many, many parliaments. So we have a lot on our plate right now, so it's not going to be certainly in this parliament.
So reading between the lines, don't expect to see any real change happen there anytime soon, which means it's up to individual municipalities to figure out these situations, unless, of course, they try and make bigger changes, which result in the provincial government having to make a decision like they will in Surrey sometime in the next couple weeks.
Okay, so how much do all of these police forces cost?
Oh, quite a bit. It's about $2 billion overall for the entire province. And we crunched the numbers for Metro Vancouver specifically. And in the next year, it's forecasted to be $1.2 billion. This is what's currently forecasted for the budget for expenses for every police force in the region. And you can see as high as just under $400 million for Vancouver, as little as $2 million when you combine Belcarra, Lions Bay, and more. At the end of the day, all of these different municipalities are making their own decisions with their own police forces there. Some people believe the current system works well, but again, MLAs 10 months ago said that they believed it didn't. They put forward this recommendation to the province. But again, listening to Mike Farnworth, doesn't appear that we're going to be changing from the status quo, at least in that particular development, anytime soon.
Justin McElroy live tonight. Thank you, Justin. Richmond RCMP have arrested a man in connection with 2 random assaults against women that happened on Valentine's Day. The first woman was found lying unconscious by a bystander on Buswell Street, just north of Cook Road. She was initially believed to be in medical distress and taken to hospital. Later that same day, a second woman reported being assaulted in the same area around the same time. Mounties say they have arrested 41-year-old Ernesto Mendoza Melgapo.
In this instance, we have recommended 1 charge to Crown Counsel, but we have 2 victims. And the issue is that we need more evidence. We need witnesses to come forward. As you can see, this is a fairly high traffic area at this time of day, which is why we're speaking to you at this time of day. We also have a bus loop right here with Brighouse Station right near us, and we have a lot of vehicle traffic as well.
RCMP are appealing for witnesses, including a man who stopped to help the second victim after she was attacked and who may have witnessed the assault. They are also looking for the occupants of a white SUV seen driving by at the time of the attack. Anyone with information can contact RCMP using the number on your screen. Well, the NDP MLA who resigned yesterday is saying this is not her end in politics, despite the BC legislature feeling like a torture chamber. And as Angela Starrett reports, Melanie Mark was honored today at a special ceremony.
I want my daughters to have the best life.
Melanie Mark was brushed off with cedar and smudge today at a ceremony to recognize her efforts as an MLA. At her announcement yesterday, she spoke about the brutality of partisan politics, but today she centered on family and community.
Here I was blanketed today with love. I'm so proud to be Niska. I wish my grandparents were alive to see me get sworn in.
While she says she left the legislature to slow down and focus on her two daughters, age 19 and 12, she says she's not done advocating for her people.
That to me is just really, really powerful, that I got to go to work and fight for people's rights, and we did great things as an NDP government, and we're going to keep doing it.
We're all so proud of you.
Grand Chief Stuart Phillip invited Mark to the ceremony and had words for the men whose faces line the legislature that she's departing.
We're gleefully implementing the repressive laws of colonialism and taking away our lands and our way of life. And you had to go to that environment every single day.
And for some Indigenous women, fighting within a system that continually tells them they don't belong in politics isn't worth the pain.
The whole colonial system is oppressive, and as long as it's there and dominant, it will always be oppressive.
McIver is one of the most recognizable names in Indigenous women's rights advocacy. She says she'd go as far as to dissuade her grandchildren away from what she calls colonial politics.
And unless it changes, there's no hope for us to belong to it and not end up being battered.
As for Mark,
I'm going to do anything and everything I can to make sure that my seat is taken by someone just like me, and that person's going to fight for our people. And it's got to be a matriarch.
Mark wouldn't say exactly what she's going to do now, but says it will be a focus on the environment and her family. Angela Sterrett, CBC News, Musqueam.
And BC Liberal leader Kevin Falcon, meanwhile, had more to say about Mark's explosive resignation, saying it's unfortunate she feels her time in the legislature was not a good experience.
Women that always have a tougher go of it. There's just no question about it. And that's why I think it's always a challenge trying to attract women into politics.
In her resignation, Mark called out the BC Liberals for going too far in their criticisms of her. Falcon says the party asked hard questions to government, particularly around the Royal BC Museum. Plans to rebuild the flagship attraction were paused after public outcry last year. Well, starting next month, Ottawa will be introducing special temporary measures to make it easier for Iranian nationals to stay in Canada.
With these new measures, we hope to ease the hardship they're currently facing by making it easier for them to stay longer in a place where it is safe to live and to work, and perhaps one day to call home.
Amid a wave of deadly protests which have sparked a government crackdown, Ottawa is simplifying the process for Iranians visiting, studying, or working in Canada to extend their stay, and creating an open work permit pathway to make it easier for Iranians to support themselves while they are here. Canadian citizens and Canadian permanent residents in Iran who wish to come home will also have their passport and other fees waived. Well, a federal decision to permanently shut down 15 salmon farms off BC Discovery Island is being heralded as a win for environmental activists and a major blow to the industry. Researchers have long maintained salmon farms are dangerous to wild salmon populations, but as Michelle Gussoub reports, even among marine biologists, there's ongoing disagreement about the data.
The closure of 15 salmon farms in BC, a major blow for an industry whose future was already uncertain.
We have been singled out as a scapegoat for this industry, and we see ourselves as part of the solution.
For years, the farms have been blamed for harming wild salmon populations, though there's an ongoing disagreement about the science behind those claims. At the center of the debate is the question of whether wild salmon become infected by sea lice as they migrate past fish farms along the BC coast. The Discovery Islands area is a key migration route for wild salmon, where narrow passages bring migrating juvenile salmon into close contact with the farms. Sea lice thrive in the farm's dense environments, and can weaken and even kill young salmon. In a statement explaining the decision to close the farms, the DFO said only there is uncertainty with respect to the risks, calling it a difficult but necessary decision.
This, again, seems like a political decision. In fact, we're very aware that, this is a political decision. It's bowing to environmental campaigners in this polarized situation here.
Salmon farms are required to perform monthly counts of sea lice on their fish. DFO officials then perform audits to make sure those numbers are accurate and conduct their own studies. But academics across Canada have long been critical of DFO research and called for more transparency.
All these scientists see the same thing as I do. When you have salmon farms, you get sea lice on juvenile wild salmon. There's also infection with the viruses and the bacteria that are flourishing in these farms. So the salmon farming industry, can just stop struggling for a minute and release their data on sea lice and let's have a look.
With the 15 farms permanently closed, up to 1,500 jobs are now at risk. The province says while it respects the DFO's decision, it's disappointed by the lack of plan to support First Nations communities and workers that depend on the farms. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
A renowned forest ecologist in BC is fielding criticism of her life's work. Suzanne Simard has garnered international attention for her research on trees and her findings that trees communicate. But a recent citation review claims her work might not be applicable to every forest. As Ali Patargay tells us, Simard is standing by the integrity of her research.
It's what many call the wood wide web. Trees communicating with each other through networks in the soil using mycorrhizal fungi attached to their roots. That's according to UBC forest ecologist Suzanne Simard, who is at the forefront of studying forest networks.
It's really, really important work for protecting forests.
She's been credited for influencing how people understand trees in a way that likens their behavior to how societies function. She says trees share nutrients with younger saplings and release chemicals that warn each other of distress, much like a community. But a recent citation review published in Nature, Ecology and Evolution claims there is insufficient evidence to support this, saying studies using this approach only looked at 2 forest types, Douglas fir forests in BC and pine forests in Japan.
Most scientists in this field would agree that it's probably likely that trees are connected below ground through these mycorrhizal fungi, but we don't understand their persistence, we don't understand who is connected to who in the forest.
Our concern is really that we shouldn't automatically assume that these happen everywhere.
The co-authors are disputing the claim that mycorrhizal networks are widespread in forests. They say nutrients could be transferred in other ways, but Simard says their critiques are missing the major point of her work that encourages viewing forests as connected ecosystems that form relationships.
This article really focused on a very narrow part of that, but overall, the idea that forests are connected and communicative places, that doesn't change.
Still, the co-authors are asking for more evidence.
The message is that although these fungi are there and very important, we need to study a lot more forests to see how well they're connected. They're extremely variable.
Simard says she is welcoming more calls for research.
That's always needed, especially in ecosystems as complex as forests. We need to work together as teams to really solve these complex problems.
Simard says critiques of any research are expected, and the back and forth is a natural part of the scientific method. Ali Patarga, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, this latest bout of winter hit East Vancouver Island pretty hard overnight, bringing around a foot of snow to some areas.
They said it doesn't snow here, that's why I moved here.
Some vehicles were still lodged in ditches from when the snow was falling last night. It shut down schools from Nanoose Bay to Qualicum Beach, and Canada Post canceled delivery in Port Alberni and Parksville. The cold weather is expected to last until the end of the week. And to talk more about that, we bring in meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe. Last until the end of the week, and on Saturday, a big dump, right?
It's true. For almost all of the province, Anita, we are all getting a big snowfall, and that includes Metro Vancouver and the island. You will get your second round. But yeah, that was such a narrow band of snow, brought on in part by this swirling system, bringing almost sea effect snow to that narrow section of East Vancouver Island. We'll talk more about that swirling low later on in the show. It's cold but clear for the rest of the province. Not clear of warnings, though. Here are the special weather statements and warnings in place tonight. The red are the wind chills, where we're seeing them dip below -20 in places that don't normally get them through tomorrow morning, and that really makes exposed skin feel that much colder. The white is the special weather statements that have been issued not just for Prince George, as they were yesterday, extended now to the North Okanagan, Vancouver Island, the Sunshine Coast, and yes, all of Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley for the snow on Saturday. And we are talking significant amounts, 20 to 30 centimeters up towards Prince George, and 10 to 30 centimeters for the South Coast. And I have to say, the models, even a couple days out, don't usually agree this well on that 10 to 30 centimeter range. 30 centimeters probably more likely for higher elevations and the Fraser Valley, but 30 centimeters for Metro Vancouver is a big event. And even 10 to 20 with this system as it moves down to the South Coast for Saturday night will disrupt plans. So start thinking about changing Saturday night into Sunday morning, and I'll take you through the rest of the week coming up.
You know, I used to like snow, Joe, and I'm kind of over it.
I think most of us are over it now, yep.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
A year of war. Tomorrow marks 1 year since Russia attacked. We speak to residents about the toll, both physically and mentally, in Ukraine. That's next. Thanks for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. As extreme cold warnings are in place for some areas across the province and the temperatures drop across the lower mainland, animals are feeling the chill as well when they step outside. The Edmonton Humane Society's Dr. Michelle Mackelberg has some ways to keep your pet safe in the winter.
The first thing to look at would be pad or paw health. The digital pads can become really cracked and abraded and have little micro fissures in them, so little kind of splinters. That can be a sign that would create some major discomfort. Broken toenails would be really common in the winter. We see them all the time and they can be really uncomfortable. They're fairly obvious to most owners in that they can bleed a fair bit. There are various ice melt products that have chemicals in them that are irritating to the skin and can create some inflammation or abrasions. We can also see that the thaw-freeze cycle creates really uneven, rough ground. And so it's really common for us to see pad abrasions or lacerations. And those can be really uncomfortable and really painful. It's fairly common for us to see cold exposure in the form of frostbite. I would say the most common areas that we would see it would be in areas the furthest from the heart. So the ear tips, the tips of the tail, and then the toes. Generally, dogs will tell you that it's uncomfortable either in the moment by sort of paw lifting or after the walk by licking their paws constantly. And there are physical signs that they're too cold: sluggish behavior, lethargic, heat-seeking. They can have changes in the colors of their extremities. That would obviously tell you that they need to have some indoor time. There's not a lot of data behind this, and I think it's because dogs are just so variable in coat, in size, in cold tolerance. Generally, I would say at -10, you need to start making some accommodations, and those accommodations can be shortening your walks, adding on layers, moving indoors for some animals. Booties have been really well marketed as something that's really great for your pets. And in some occasions that's absolutely true, but sometimes it's probably more of a stressor than it is an actual protective mechanism. So again, it's knowing your pet and understanding their cues, telling you that you push them beyond their comfort level. Doing some proactive care, making sure that your dog's nails aren't excessively long, trimming up really excessively long hair on the feet so that they don't amass a bunch of little micro snowballs that can be really uncomfortable. There are some topical products that you can place in the paws, especially for ones that maybe have previously been injured or they're dry and cracked, and so a lanolin-based ointment, it's often called paw wax, can be helpful in sort of just creating that barrier. Wipe your dog's feet after a walk. It takes any of that ice melt that might be lingering away, and it dries the pads so that we don't have this really wet, moist fur that's collecting in between their little toes. The minute that the paws get wet, they do get a bit colder. Your dog is probably fairly good at navigating those things, and so I would say let the dog take the lead on that one.
The United Nations voted today to ask Russia to end its war in Ukraine. 147 countries voted yes, just 6 said no. But in Kyiv and throughout Ukraine, there's little talk of an end as the country gears up for more conflict. Margaret Evans is in the capital tonight with more.
A year ago, the world was waiting to see if Vladimir Putin really would order the invasion of Ukraine. Today, the wait is to see if the Russian president will unleash yet another round of massive strikes to punctuate that anniversary. And Ukraine's allies are gathering round. In Paris, the Eiffel Tower is dressed in blue and yellow. There will be a life after this war, said the Paris mayor Anne Hidalgo, because Ukraine will win. Down the road in Brussels, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg was talking about two worlds, the before and the after February 24th.
If President Putin and Russia stops fighting, then the war will end. We will have peace. If President Zelensky and Ukraine stops fighting, then Ukraine will cease to exist as a sovereign independent nation. So this is not two equal parties. It's an aggressor and a victim of aggression.
And here in Ukraine, people are taking stock, still coming to terms with loss and hardship and the knowledge they're about to start a second year of war. Some are more optimistic than others. We're still fighting, says Anastasia Vasilenko. Ukrainians will be free. The Deputy Defense Minister, Hanna Maliar, held a briefing to declare Ukraine's top 10 victories of the past year, from repulsing Russian tanks near Kyiv to sinking Russia's Moskva battleship. But on the hard battlefronts in the south and east, there is a different kind of reckoning. In Bakhmut, Ukrainian soldiers are still hanging on to the city, now a moonscape of destruction, despite predictions that it would fall long before now. We don't need big losses, says a tank unit commander named Dennis. People are our main resources. As long as we don't sacrifice too many resources, we will hold on out here. Asked if things will get worse, he says the worst has already happened. Margaret Evans, CBC News, Kharkiv.
A couple from the Fraser Valley has spent much of the last year in Ukraine helping people there through their charity Hungry for Life. Joining me live is Chilliwack's Chad Martz. Now, Chad, you're back in BC for a little bit. Your wife is still in Ukraine. What has it been like this past year for you, boots on the ground helping people there?
I would say it's been excruciating to see the level of pain and destruction that people are enduring in Ukraine. It's been a blessing for us to be able to respond to the needs of people, but by just asking what does it look like there, it's complete devastation in so many villages and towns and cities, as we've been pretty much across the entire country and just recently back near the front lines. There's so many layers to the devastation that's going on in Ukraine. There's families that have been separated for the duration of this war. There's so many single parents because of losing their loved ones that are serving in the military. It's the people who have been under occupation for so many months have gone through unspeakable horrors. It's almost like you can't go anywhere in the country without meeting somebody who's been significantly impacted by this war.
We saw just some images here that you gave to us of supplies in a big warehouse. Can you explain sort of what that is and what your team has been doing there to help these people?
Sure. Since the beginning of the war, we focused on providing food to the most desperate situations in the country. About 2.4 million pounds worth of food, and we continue to go out each and every week. And so that's one of the warehouses there that is utilized to store the food and get out into the many different areas of the country.
Hungry for Life has raised more than $3 million in the last year. Can you tell us more about how British Columbians have helped contribute to that?
Oh, I wish I could bring you to even just see the people when they receive the food and how grateful and thankful that they are, and how they communicate and convey back to myself, to people who have contributed, and specifically people in British Columbia. There's been so many people here in BC alone that was helping much, like way before the war even started. And when the war broke out, have been a major contributing factor to those resources being able to go into the front line and into places where refugees are being housed. And so it's a huge amount of gratefulness to be able to continue to contribute to the resolve and resiliency of people. You've continued to be able to keep the morale going of people and meeting them in their most desperate times. So I'm so grateful for those in BC that have contributed towards this crisis.
Chad, just really quickly here, do you have any hope for the future there, given all the devastation you're seeing?
Yeah, we're talking about dates being 1 year, and I can't believe we were even talking about that. But I think the hope more is for the specific date of when Ukraine is going to gain its freedom. And so that's what people are looking towards. But hope can be a dangerous thing. And so there doesn't seem to be an end in sight for Ukrainians on the short term. But we always have to hold on to that because there's no other option for Ukrainians. So on one hand, yes, there is hope. We just don't know when it's going to be coming, as we're speaking 364 days later.
Chilliwack's Chad Martz joining us live tonight. He is part of the group Hungry for Life, helping in Ukraine. Thank you, Chad.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Anita.
Well, Ukraine's Western allies have been putting ever-increasing sanctions on Russia. It's an effort to hobble the country's economy and limit Moscow's ability to continue its invasion. But as Briar Stewart tells us, there are ways around some of the penalties.
I remember when IKEA was open, this section of the mall was jam-packed.
On his YouTube channel, Konstantin Rajkov wanted to see whether Russian malls had become full of empty storefronts.
Take a look at this shop right here, Sneaker Box. Doesn't ring a bell? No surprise. This brand didn't exist until recently.
But as he strolled through, he found plenty of familiar Western brands. This store is selling Reebok products sold by a Turkish entity importing the shoes. Other new stores carry Chinese and even Belarusian brands.
I'm hard-pressed to find any single brand that I cannot buy in Russia at the moment. Even Apple, you can buy Apple easily. It's just not a problem.
But sanctions aren't about targeting Western brands. They're about squeezing the country's economy and constraining its ability to fund the war. That impact also mixed. 20 years ago, Vladimir Milov was serving as Russia's Deputy Minister of Energy. Now he's living in exile, advising Western governments on how to strengthen sanctions.
They will deliver the result and stop Putin after some time. They could not have had this immediate effect as many people dreamed about.
While Europe is poised to unveil another package of sanctions, Milov believes the focus should be on closing loopholes.
Compliance is key. Putin is very effectively circumventing the sanctions.
The U.S. has warned countries, including Turkey and the UAE, that there will be repercussions if they help Russia evade sanctions.
Экономический фронт.
This week, President Putin boasted that the West was failing to isolate the country's economy,
which helps with...
But experts say cracks are beginning to show.
Since December, when the oil embargo kicked in, we're seeing immediate impact on the Russian budget. Our revenues from oil and gas dropped by 46%. And that's quite astonishing. We're seeing immediate impact.
After the invasion began, higher energy prices cushioned the blow of sanctions. But experts believe as the year progresses, the strain on Russia's economy will be more obvious and harder for the government to dismiss. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
Hundreds of people killed in police interactions since 2000 in Canada. Why those numbers are climbing and what might be done about it is next.
The Central Fraser Valley, peaceful, conservative, social credit country, and Vanderzam country. It has been for a very long time. This riding has been a social credit stronghold since day one, almost 40 years. In the last election, the Stow-Creds swept the polls here, every poll. These are Vanderzam's people. We're here to ask them if they still are. Abbotsford. Will you support Premier Vanderzam if he continues to stay on as leader?
I sure will, because he has helped me out with quite a few problems already in this community, and I will stick up for him anytime.
I think he's a pretty good guy. I think that the media just gets a hold of a lot of the juicy details and kind of puts a real damper on things for his political future.
I think he's done a pretty good job.
Clearbrook. Did you vote for Premier Vanderzam in the last election?
I sure did.
Will you vote for him again?
I sure will.
Why?
Because I like him.
How come?
Because he's just a great guy.
I believe he's trying to do a responsible job.
Musqueam.
I think he's great.
How come?
Because he's a man that stands behind his principles.
And what principles of his do you like?
I like his stand on abortion.
We also tried to reach as many Central Fraser Valley delegates to the last Social Credit Leadership Convention as possible. All but one were solidly behind the Premier.
I think it's a good indication that possibly, I think we should not be deceived with the caribou. I think caribou is an isolated case, and I don't think that we can base our decision as party members at convention on that type of a scenario.
We won't know for sure until the next general election, but anyone who thinks there will be a tidal wave of Vanderzam opposition had better talk to the people in the Central Fraser Valley first. Tammy Tomlinson, CBC News, Abbotsford.
Land Back is a CBC original podcast where we uncover land theft in Canada and look at how Indigenous people are taking it all back.
And that's what empowered nations and empowered people to just literally steal land.
This is a consequence of your actions.
And it's time to give land back.
Land Back is out now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
Deaths resulting from police brutality in Canada appear to be on the rise. The CBC's Thomas Degla looks into what researchers are saying and how racial differences play a factor.
Hi, everybody.
Chantel Moore had recently celebrated her 26th birthday. A member of the Claoquiat First Nation in BC, officers were called to her New Brunswick home 3 years ago for a wellness check. She was shot 4 times, becoming one of more than 700 people in Canada since 2000 who died after police use of force.
I feel like as people are being treated as criminals and they're not. We have police that are not trained properly, to do wellness checks.
Figures newly compiled by university researchers and civil liberties advocates suggest a steady increase in deadly police use of force. With 69 incidents in 2022, that's more than any other previous year on record.
And we might say that we have greater access to information now, but actually we don't. So that doesn't really account for why we see more.
No government agency makes such comprehensive data available. The figures show Black and Indigenous people are disproportionately represented in police killings.
We have not consistently been capturing what communities have been saying, and we know historically has been going on in communities for decades.
The Black Lives Matter movement boosted global scrutiny of law enforcement, but pandemic lockdowns and stress may have something to do with it too, says this longtime officer.
It's caused an elevated level of confrontation at all levels, and that would include the police.
The data doesn't say how often police were found to be justified in their use of force. As for Chantel Moore, a coroner's jury ruled her death a homicide.
Many of the deaths listed here, the name is simply marked unknown. Advocates view that as a grim reminder of how little information is released when Canadian police kill someone. Thomas Dagle, CBC News, Toronto.
New healthcare deals are starting to fall into place between the provinces and the federal government. Ontario and all of the Atlantic provinces have now signed agreements in principle with Ottawa. The CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian has more.
We've actually just confirmed agreements in principle with the 4 Atlantic provinces and Ontario, who've said, yes, we're in for these healthcare deals.
Those thumbs up coming after years of asks from provinces and territories for more money in healthcare. Last week, they agreed to a general deal that would see the federal government pump billions of dollars in new money into the system. Now come the specifics. Ontario is getting $8 billion over the next decade. The Atlantic provinces between $288 million and $1 billion each.
We're going to continue to ask for more. There's no question, but we are grateful for this money. We feel that it will help accelerate and support the work that's already happening through our own provincial investment, which is significant.
The cash infusion is to go toward funding family health services in underserved areas like remote and rural communities, mental health access, and hiring in the healthcare workforce. Ottawa says the deals are tailored to specific needs too, while it expects premiers to provide action plans and targets to their constituents.
Different provinces have different levels of access, for example, to primary care physicians already. Different abilities to deliver mental health care, different data systems or different levels of sophistication in their data.
Today's news is cause for cautious optimism for some advocates.
It's important to recognize that at the end of signing these deals, the work has not yet been done. You know, what really needs to happen is the follow through to make sure that these changes and commitments end up getting manifested within the system. Until we see patients start to have a better experience accessing care.
More than half the provinces and territories have not signed their individual deals yet. The Prime Minister says he expects more announcements in the next few days and weeks. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Ottawa.
At 6:46 our time, a live look at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, a mountain town bracing for a big blast of winter, the latest on a pair of storms hitting the U.S. and our coming blast of winter as well.
we're sharing really important information with the public, and I feel like this is exactly what our job is, especially as the public broadcaster, especially in morning radio. That's incredibly important.
Moving to the U.S. now, where extreme weather warnings continue as a multi-day storm wreaks havoc on traffic, travel, and power in many states. Several days of heavy snowfall have made driving treacherous along the Canadian-U.S. border, as well as in the Midwest and in parts of California. 40 centimeters of snow fell in some areas there. Many roads are closed. High winds and ice downed power lines, and thousands of flights were canceled. Now, there are still blizzard warnings in effect, and emergency crews are working full tilt. The cold weather is expected to continue for another 2 days. And that cold weather, according to Joe, in the U.S. is connected to our snow on Qualicum, on Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
I gotta know how.
Yeah, it really is. This is an unusual event for California, and it's the same swirling low that brought the snow to the east side of the Vancouver Island that's headed south, dragging that cold air with it. It's already brought some snow to California. But I have to show you the big picture, that Arctic air mass fully entrenched across the prairies, all of the prairies under extreme cold warnings, including Northern Ontario and Northern Quebec. Meanwhile, Washington, D.C. hit 27 degrees Celsius today in the contrast to that cold air. But speaking of cold air, this has only happened once before in Los Angeles' history. They are under a blizzard warning tonight for that same swirling low to bring snow to the Hollywood Hills through the overnight and into tomorrow morning. But there it is. That's the same low that brought those onshore winds to Nanaimo, Qualicum last night, and it's pummeling California as we speak, sliding down to Southern California and actually intensifying over the next 24 hours. A very unusual setup to see this kind of cold air this far south. And a reminder that Southern California has already been through 9 damaging atmospheric rivers this season. Okay, -6 for us in Vancouver overnight tonight. It's colder than it was last night. These morning lows will be likely hit around 6, 7, 8 a.m. and there will be a bit of a wind chill. The next event after we get through cold and clear tomorrow is that snow that we've been talking about. Taking you through the track, you can see Prince George getting quite a bullseye through Saturday. That same storm system will climb down into Metro Vancouver starting Saturday afternoon, and the models have been pretty consistent at the timing of this, with the heaviest of the snow happening Saturday evening overnight before possibly mixing in with some rain on Sunday. But this is pretty consistent with what all the models have been saying for totals. Southern sections of Metro Vancouver may only end up with 5 to 10 centimeters. As we head further north and east, this is where 30 centimeters is on the table. We're still far enough away that Environment Canada hasn't upgraded that special weather statement to a warning. I expect that to happen tomorrow, and then we'll really hone in on those mounts. But one way or another, a big winter event for Metro Vancouver. And then as we come out the other side, Sunday afternoon, we'll see some sun. Notice our afternoon highs mild, so any precip we get will be rain during the afternoon. But the overnight low is cold enough that we might not be done with the wet snow after our big Saturday snow. So lots to watch for.
All right, thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
Coming up next, it's a new take on an old classic. After the break, a look at the Vancouver Canucks tribute celebrating the late Gino Ojic.
It's practice day for these Mogul competitors. They traveled to Crab Mountain by bus from PEI, where they have been since the games started.
I've never been there before, so check that one off the box as one of the provinces, and cool to go over the Confederation Bridge. That's a pretty long bridge. It's cool.
The skiers went to the opening ceremony in Charlottetown and got to spend several days in the athletes' village. Some have been competing in other freestyle events on PEI, and now they are here for Moguls.
I was a little nervous because like 2 different hills, like 2 different courses, and I didn't even know that PEI had a ski hill.
I thought that was a little cool because I was like, well, we get to go to PEI for a little bit and then travel somewhere else to ski too, so you kind of get 2 in 1 there.
The athletes will stay in nearby Fredericton, the lone sport in New Brunswick, without others from their home province to cheer them on.
So there's not going to be the rest of the BC team and all the other teams, so hopefully the locals here will come out and support us.
The long track speed skaters are attracting attention at the Halifax Oval, cheering for all of the teams, including the 2 competitors from Team PEI.
It's not quite like home field advantage. We don't have all the fans here, but it's still pretty nice.
In Halifax, competitors will stay at a hotel across from the Oval. Organizers hope it's as close as possible to being on PEI.
They'll miss out in a location like this, you know, where the pin trading is going on and the merchandise center. There's probably a little bit more buzz around here in the Athletes Village, but we try to replicate that as much as we can for those athletes in both Halifax and Fredericton.
The games wrap up for all of these competitors on Saturday. They will be heading home as athletes for Week 2 arrive on Prince Edward Island. Nancy Russell, CBC News, Charlottetown.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
On March 29th, join Leanne Young at the Zilly Cares Conversation on Care, a mental health fundraiser with special guests Dr. Gabor Mate and Dr. Mariam Zainadin. Get your tickets at zillycare.com. And never miss a special programming series, event, or contest. Subscribe to CBC Vancouver's e-newsletter at cbc.ca/Vancouver inbox and keep connected with us.
Well, the Canucks will be sporting a warm-up jersey in honor of Gino Ojic next month. It's designed by his cousin, Jay Ojic. The Algonquin artist incorporated a traditional Anishinaabe design for the numbers on the jersey, which is a flip of the team's popular spaghetti skate design. He also used traditional medicine wheel colors. The main feature is a Thunderbird, which is an important symbol to many First Nations groups.
The Thunderbird has meaning to different First Nations groups, of course, but for the Anishinaabe people, it tends to symbolize a symbol of power, strength, and is seen as a protector to the people. And I think that more than anything else I could have chosen speaks to who Gino was as a person.
Proceeds from the jersey will go to local First Nation youth programs, something Jay Ojic says is fitting since Gino's fans in BC adopted his cousin as their own. Yeah, the skate is typically a favorite for a lot of people, and I think Jay did a really good job of making that his own. A fitting tribute for someone so respected, so loved in this province, and I'm sure this is just one of many tributes still to come for Gino Ojic. Well, that's it for CBC Vancouver News tonight at 6. We will see you tomorrow.